there is a very high correlation between sexual sadism and psychopathy. I can make the counter argument as well that at least in some part of his life, maybe he cared about his family. So it's never as black and white, I think, as we want to make it seem.
Look, if there was an adult there who may have noticed this, they could literally have prevented a serial killer and prevented these deaths without a doubt. Hey, everybody. Josh Zeman here. Thank you so much for being part of our Sinister community and for making it such a success. And thank you for listening to our podcast, Monster Hunting the Long Island Serial Killer, which you can get anywhere you get your podcasts. Now, tonight we're going to answer a question I've had ever since the List case first broke, namely, what creates a sexual sadist? What actually motivates somebody to do such horrific and terrible things to another person? Now, why is this important? Because knowing the answer can actually help prevent crimes like this from happening in the first place. And quite honestly, maybe it could save somebody's life. Now, today I'm joined by somebody who can help us get there. Dr. Joni Johnston, a forensic psychologist and somebody who has spent her career interviewing violent offenders, trying to find out what it is that turns fantasy into murder. And if you're like me, then you want real answers from experts, because you know the devil is in the details. So hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and let's take a deep dive into darkness. We know that Rex was bullied as a child, and from what it sounds like mercilessly bullied.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, because interestingly enough, of his largesse, because he was so big and oafish.
And from what has been made public, and again, this is all we're basing this speculation on, and it sounds like he was somebody from some of his peers, is somebody who did just kind of held everything in, but then would have a nasty temper periodically. And it's like that, I think, speaks to this kind of inability to regulate his emotions, right? He holds everything in, holds it in, but when it comes out, it comes out. And I think that also kind of mirrors maybe this compartmentalization over time, right? Where you have somebody who's functioning in the world, they're successful professionally, they've been married for a long period of time, they have children, they're living in a nice community, and yet there's the basement room that's locked that nobody can go in, right? And there's this mess in the house, and in the car, it looks like it's 500 homeless people have been living in it and putting their trash in there, and yet he's an architect. I mean, there's just these real interesting kind of bizarre things there.
So he learns the compartmentalized behavior in theory from basically having to compartmentalize the bullying that he gets as a child and from his parents, because that's the other thing, right? We also know the stories, or at least anecdotally, stories of domineering fathers. Is it domineering fathers and over connected mother? I'm not quite sure.
I think from one I mean, that's certainly something I've seen in other sexually motivated serial killers, where there's a critical father or absent father, and then there's this kind of over controlling and meshed mother, and so there's this kind of dependency on the kid, but at the same time this over controlling, and so this kid feels they're in a dilemma because their mom needs them in a lot of respects, and they want to please their mom, so they push any anger and resentment down. But because they're being over controlled, there's this anger and resentment. And of course, kids, push back on their parents anyway. And so, some of his peers talk about him having to get home to mom and wanting to get home to mom. And so, you start seeing that mirrored in him, that he may be angry at her and resentful for this over control, but there's a real need there as well, right? He's got to stay connected to her. And that's where a lot of this resentment and anger can kind of get pushed down.
Right. And the fact that his father died when he was 12. So that, that's it's all these interesting kind of commingling issues that kind of create. Now, just to step back really quick, because I'm sure there's some people going to be like, why do we care about this? Why is any of this even important? Why are we discussing this? He's a serial killer. Let's put him in jail. Why is this important?
I mean, I've had some of those same thoughts at times. I've been on, a different show, and I'm talking about the same person over and over again. I think ultimately, we need to do a better job as a society and as a mental health professionals in particular, and as teachers and those kinds of things, to realize the things that we, at least I am older than you, but when I was growing up, a lot of the things that we thought were normal are not normal. They're damaging to kids. So bullying, for example, we know that it has horrendous impact and can have lifelong impact on kids. And yet when I was growing up, it was almost like if you're being bullied, you know, you need to stand up for yourself. That was the solution, right? Don't
Mhm.
take it.
Yeah.
Well, we know as parents, certainly, that, okay, what does that even mean? I mean,
Yeah.
it's like kids but gang up on you. I mean, it's like, what are you supposed to do? And I mean, I've seen plenty of kids who were actually spanked at home because they weren't sticking up for themselves, which is
Hmm.
an even more bizarre kind of thing when you think about it. I mean, what does that do? So I
Yep.
mean, I think we need to really understand, to recognize when kids are struggling, when kids are being bullied, and there needs to be more intervention sooner. Number one, for sure.
Look, if there was an adult there who may have noticed this, they could literally have prevented a serial killer and prevented these deaths without a doubt. Right?
Well, you're right. I mean, that's one of the tricky things. People kind of go, what makes a serial killer? It's like, well, it's like having a puzzle. And you're right. If you take one or two pieces out, then it doesn't form together.
Yeah, the puzzle's not completed.
Exactly, exactly. But there oftentimes are so many pieces. Like, okay, would he have been a serial killer if he is in fact one? If his dad hadn't died when he was 12, we don't know that, right? We can look and see all these traumas that happened to him growing up, and kind of go, maybe if one of these did happen, all these things wouldn't have aligned. But we do know that when kids lose a parent, they need help. They need help. They need support,
Yeah.
and make sure they get those things. So I think it's looking back a lot of times at those risk factors and not looking now and saying, okay, what does the burlap mean? And we can talk about what the burlap might symbolize or
Yeah,
those
yeah,
kinds of
exactly.
things. But I mean, really, is that okay? What does that mean? Don't buy burlap. I mean, what is the practical value of those kinds of things? But trying to put that puzzle together, I think hopefully is going to help us more and more in the future. Just address each of those puzzle pieces when they happen. So it doesn't
Yeah,
come together like it does, or like it potentially did.
potentially. I mean, look, speaking to a guy like Mark Safrick, who literally his job was a profiler for the BSU, and so what's he working on now? He's working on mass shooters. Bullying is a critical factor in mass shootings. I mean, so it just upsets me that people keep saying, like, why are we looking at it? It's like, buddy, we're trying to stop this stuff. And if you step in, you could stop it. So that is why we are looking at it. So supremely fascinating. But so we have the bullying. Oh, by the way, name me another Long Island serial killer who was bullied, who liked to kill sex workers?
Joel Rifkin.
Joel Rifkin.
Yeah.
I mean, it's right there.
Yeah.
And especially Long Island just has this incredible suburbia. It's almost like Heathers in a way. It just kind of really digs in there. So we know that this is important stuff. We're talking about bullying. We're talking about death of a father at 12 years old. We're talking about also a father who was always critical of him, it seemed. Then there's some other factors that I found interesting, and I want to know whether you think or how this manifests itself, or could, allegedly, again, but scenario building. The one thing we do know that he excelled in was shooting as a kid. Like, that was his sport. What does that say to you?
Well, I mean, there's all different ways to talk about that. So, I grew up in the South, and let me tell you, most of the people I knew were hunting, right? And they were shooting from an early age. They weren't collecting 300 guns. They weren't starting at 18 to collect 300 guns. They didn't have them in a room where people couldn't access them, or didn't, he protected them. They were like his treasures or whatever. He seemed to express a tremendous amount of enthusiasm for hunting, and it seemed to be a game to him, and he liked to win. So it was a way for him to feel powerful. So I think that's probably another piece of the puzzle for him. And I think that's the thing. It's like what you said is so true. It's like, what I hear all the time, which is so true also, which is, well, I was bullied when I was a child. I didn't become this person, or yes, you're absolutely right. None of these things should happen to anybody, but that doesn't mean that people who've been bullied are going to end up bullying other people or killing other people. But they're not good things, right? And they're traumatic for kids. And the other reason to talk about this stuff in terms of trying to trace back, traumas and life events and triggers and those kinds of things, is we can do something about it then. By the time somebody becomes a sexual sadist, there's not much we can do.
Oof.
It's so fused, right? That violent, that sexual preference, that, the paraphilia is
Hmm.
so hardwired at that point. I
Hmm.
mean, I don't know of any sexual sadist who's gone in for treatment and said, this is a problem for me. It's other people it's a problem for, right? It's not the person.
There is a famous story about Joel Rifkin saying that he walked into a library wanting to know why he felt the things that he felt. And he picked up a psychology book. On one shelf was a psychology book, and on the other shelf was a book about Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer. And this was a moment in his life. It could have gone either way, and he picked up the book about Gary Ridgway. And so these are very important. I mean, obviously, we all love Mindhunter, so we're all into the psychology these days, of course. But it is interesting to me, and I think also that helps us maybe figure out, are there other victims there? So, but to get back to the hunting, so he obviously gets some kind of self-worth out of hunting because it's something that he really excels at while he's being bullied. So he doesn't have anything else. By the way, very interesting. We always talk about, especially in this day and age, how important it is for boys to become playing school sports if they are feeling alone. That bonding with other people helps them kind of get some of those urges. But here he's got this very singular, lonely, alone hunting thing, and I think that seems to play out as he's then played out his fantasies, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you bring up so many good points here, Josh. I mean, one being that some of these things take on special meaning for him. And I think partly because they're the absence of other things that most people have. So if you don't have good peer relationships, if you don't have, if you're isolated, if you're awkward, if you, or you don't fit in, or you're being bullied or whatever, and you have this sense of being humiliated a lot, or being lonely, or feeling powerless, which I think is
Mm-hmm.
really what we're talking about here when we're talking about the hunting. And all of a sudden, you have this hobby that many people share, but
Right.
for you, right? It becomes super important because you don't feel powerful in the other area. So it takes on its significance. So I think that's a tricky part with some of this stuff, right? Is you have these kind of, there's a term I think in the mass shooting world, which your buddy might be able to talk about a lot more better than I can, about the edge sitters, right? I was teaching a media psychology course this summer, and we were talking about the fact that the copycat thing that happens after mass shoot. Well, no, nobody
Mm-hmm.
is watching. Not nobody's watching the latest news report on a mass shooter and saying, "Gosh, I never thought about that." I think I want to try that. It looks like so much fun. No, right? That's not it. It's that there's somebody who's an edge sitter. This person is already on the edge, and then they might read a book, they might, watch something on TV, and they get these ideas, or they get this psychological permission, or here's somebody who understands. Gary Ridgway understands me, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I can
Mm-hmm.
get ideas. He's my mentor. I can get ideas from him. It's Those are the individuals that we have to find, right, and watch out for. They're already on that edge. They already have these risk factors, and then you
Mm-hmm.
add another one on, and that could be the tipping point for that person, where it wouldn't be for you.
Right. But there's something else here, right? The difference between somebody who engages in hardcore BDSM versus somebody who has a sexual sadist. Like, there's got to be something in Rex's allegedly personality that takes it to the next level, right? What would that be?
Well, as I was kind of mentioning to you, when you look at the research on like BDSM, and versus sexual sadism, and the two are very, very, very different because of this, reliance on consent versus
Mhm.
need for lack of consent.
Right. But it's also eh, there's another part of this, right? I mean, it's the empathy, right? You were saying, or I saw some of the things where you're saying it's not just all these factors, but it has to be the lack of empathy. So there is also a psychological component to what he is missing. Like, it's not just bullying and this and this and this, right?
Yes, I think it's almost always, I have seen a few cases. I do a lot of forensic work, as you know, with offenders. So I've seen a few cases where I really felt like this person as a child had a ton of empathy and literally had it beaten out of him. I mean, just the abuse was that bad. For the most part, I think, or a lot of times, it's this interaction, as I was saying. It's the fact that this kid, for whatever reason, um, didn't show a lot of empathy. He was the kid that maybe when somebody fell down, wasn't concerned.
Mhm.
Didn't there was something a little bit missing, a little bit off, that he's kind of born that way to some extent. And he might have always been kind of an odd kid. But if his life trajectory had gone differently, he wouldn't have ended up where he potentially is now. So yes, there is typically always this kind of, we used to call it the diathesis stress model, meaning there's this predisposition meets trauma, meets situation, and that's where you get the perfect storm.
Do you think he's a psychopath in that perspective?
I would say that there is a very high correlation between sexual sadism and psychopathy.
Mhm.
Um, so, I guess if I was a betting woman, I would put my money on it. Um, um, and we can also say, well, if this is somebody who married a single mom who had a disabled child and, they had a relationship for 27 years. I mean, so, I can make the counter argument as well that at least in some part of his life, maybe he cared about her, maybe he cared about his family. So it's never as black and white, I think, as we want to make
Mhm.
it seem. I mean, sometimes
Mhm.
it is, but oftentimes it's not. Um,
And what about adding on the narcissism? Because it does seem, from what he's told people, or anecdotally, there's some narcissism there too, right?
I think that's definitely true. And it's interesting because I, do a lot of reading, too much probably research on some of these topics. And one of the things, I was writing an article recently about um, serial killers who taunt,
Hmm.
right? And they taunt a victim, or they taunt the police, or they taunt the media, or they taunt the victim's sister. And that seems to be one of the characteristics that the research suggests really separates out, and that is the level of narcissism. So that serial killers who are very narcissistic are the most likely to talk, because it's not very common. We think it is because a lot of movies have. Oh, they're calling in,
Yeah.
the police and saying, leaving clues and all that kind of stuff. It's pretty rare, but that personality trait seems to stand out in the research when you look at that. It does tend to symbolize, or you do tend to find more narcissism in individuals who need that attention and need to kind of keep feeding that beast, even when they're not dominating other people. And certainly anecdotally, you know, and I know that, work colleagues, employees, other people have talked about him being kind of full of himself, somebody who talked about himself all the time, being arrogant, being very narcissistic. That would fit in with that.
Oh, fascinating. So let me add in another wrinkle to this question. We know that there's a belt, right? And the belt that was around one of the women, considering the amount of care that he took in all of his crimes, planning, architect, etc. But yet he has a belt that has his grandfather's initials on it. Just correlating and speculating, and we understand, what does that say to you?
I mean, my educated guess, I'll put it that way, would be that this has some kind of psychological significance for him. Because I don't believe for a minute that he would overlook that he would not realize that, right? That oh, this has got some initials that can be traced to my family. I never thought about that. No, he's clearly somebody who prides himself on planning every single detail, although every person makes a mistake. It just happens.
Sure.
But I don't think this is one of them. I think for him, it has some kind of psychological significance for him. Now, I don't know if it was his grandfather's belt, which seems to be the most common theory that I've heard. I don't know if you've heard something different about that. But I would think it represented some family legacy for him. It has some symbolic family meaning for him. And I think that's why he used it. And I think he convinced himself that that's part of the game, right? He could convince
Mhm.
himself, just like calling a victim's family member is a risk, right? So,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it's interesting because we do see that Rex Heuermann again, this is him, is very methodical. I mean, obsessive, all kinds of things. But when his emotions are involved, we've seen he can, he can lose control. I mean, he can
Hmm.
do things that aren't in his best interest, like
Hmm.
calling up the sister of, one of his victims, like, perhaps running into Amber Costello's house and, putting himself at risk by being identified because he is furious that she got one over on him in terms of tricking him. I mean, so he's not somebody who can't lose, I think, control when he's really angry at somebody.
I mean, it's amazing. You're saying that almost goes back to that original descriptions of him. When he
Yeah,
exploded hard, right?
absolutely. Absolutely. And I would
Uh,
imagine, I mean, I could be wrong about this because I'm sure I don't even want to think about how his victims died. I just can't even bear to think about that. But I would imagine in his head, he created all kinds of horrible scenarios and that kind of thing. But I would bet money that he wasn't all the way controlled in terms of his actions, because you see that with him, that when he really has a lot of emotions, he, can kind of can lose control and be somewhat impulsive. And you saw that, I had not heard until you shared with me that he actually had gone shoplifting, right? When he was angry at his dad.
yeah.
And again, that's another thing that's not in your best interest to do. If you're somebody who's controlled and that kind of thing, you're going to go steal stuff and get caught. So there was a little bit of a paradox there, I think, for him.
Right. We have this kind of we always think in narratively, right? Oh, I know serial killers. I've watched a lot of movies,
Yeah.
and you think that somehow this belt, the legacy of this belt, is it that, of course, people are like, oh, he came from a family of serial killers,
Yeah.
or is it like you said, I couldn't do anything, yet I'm the, grandfather. Did he go hunting with the grandfather? Like, that's what I'm trying to
Yeah.
get to. Like, what or why, or more often when you're putting a relative, a grandfather, in that scenario, what are you saying? What is that really about?
Yeah, I mean, my first thoughts, and again, for what they are, for what they're worth, is that this is somebody who is almost kind of saying, "This is my family legacy. This is what happens when you have this generational mistreatment handled down." Now, again, that's just my own speculation, but that is the first thing that popped in my head. This is
Wow.
my legacy right here. This is where things wind up.
This is what you did to me.
Yeah,
It's interesting that you say that, because we also know that a cousin of Rex Heuermann, Reverend, allegedly, but it does sound, a little bit where there's smoke, there's fire, had abused a child, sexually abused a child. And, cousins, sexual sadism, pedophilia, paraphilic behavior, you just got to start to filter those questions in and ask, okay, how does that affect us? Generation, is there something generationally? Was this a grandfather who abused him?
yeah. I mean, I don't know. We definitely know that they found child pornography on his computer. And, we also know, which may have nothing to do with interest in children, but his victims that he selected, again, allegedly, were very petite,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
relatively young, certainly a lot younger than he was. So was that, I mean, you could say, well, he liked petite women because they were easier to handle. That could be the
Right. Dominate
case.
and control.
But I mean, this is a man who's not average size. I mean, if you're 5'8", you might pick somebody who's 4'11", because you don't want to have
Mm-hmm.
a woman who's 5'8" or whatever. But I mean, there are a lot of women he could pick that he can dominate and control if you're as big as he was. So I think there's more to it than just. I
You
think
do.
I do.
You do.
I do. I don't know
Mm.
if that means if that reflects some you know interest in children, and this is a way of somehow
W- w- Well, if we can make inferences, of course, speculation, but I remember seeing in the searches there was like janitor, schoolgirl porn.
Yeah, I don't recall. I mean, I do remember a lot of discussion about child-related pornography, or there being
Mhm.
some child-related pornography. I don't remember what that, I mean, I think, the news sources have been trying to be pretty conservative about, describing in detail exactly what it involved.
Mhm.
So you may know more than I do about what the specific pornography was, but it is concerning always, right, when somebody is consuming child pornography, because you go, why? Why is this person, if well, that certainly suggests a sexual interest there, right? Or you wouldn't be looking at that pornography.
Right. Which leads me to another question, and I think one that has kind of thrown a lot of people, which is uh, Asian dough. It just nobody could quite figure out where Asian dough fits within this makeup, psychopathy, paraphilic behavior. You know, and everybody's been speculating, and that's all we can do until we know for sure. But when you take into account Asian dough, what does that say to you?
Well, again, I'll say two things about this, and we are kind of speculating, or I am speculating, going on a limb a little bit here. But I guess a couple of things come to mind. One is, if I'm not mistaken, there was actually some searches online for Asian twink, and I'm putting that quotation marks, of course,
Yep.
because it's
Yep.
a term that I want to use. So again, that is suggests something that this brain is actually looking that up. And number two is, again, if you're thinking of sexual sadism as a paraphilia, where the primary sexual, or the primary arousal is to the infliction of pain and suffering, and watching that, then that would hypothetically open a lot of doors into who your victims are,
Mhm. Mhm.
because it's not necessarily how they look, or their gender even. It's that suffering. And so you can see how it might, somebody might be more open to a lot of different things, might be curious about a lot of different things, and see
Right,
how this
it's
person, how this person handles fear, how this person handles torture, how this person handles these horrible things.
oh, that's creepy. So what you're saying, it's not a sexual attraction, but it's it's the sadism attraction. Like, how does an African American girl handle fear? How does a Asian quote twink handle fear? All it's really more about that in the victimology than about some of what we might think would be alluring,
Yeah,
quote
and I
unquote.
think what I'm saying is that the sadism is the sexual attraction.
Hmm.
Is the sexual attraction, that fear, that pain. And you're right. If that's true, and this person, this is his turn on, is this complete domination, this complete terror and fear and torture and those kinds of things, then it would certainly make sense that somebody might want to experiment. It's not
Hmm.
gender based. It's not even necessarily age based. It could be a lot of different things. It's the experience of that person has creating that pain and that fear. That is the arousal.
Ugh.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard
It,
to even think
it,
about.
it is hard to think about, uh, but I think it is important again because we've got some other issues. Uh, Um, um, one thing that we've always looked at, and this goes all the way back to 2014, and this was one that really threw us for a loop in conjecture, in speculation. We had always thought that this hunting motif, and obviously hunting motif is going to come into any discussion of a serial killer because of hunting humans, or the
Right.
the whole most dangerous game.
Yeah.
I hunt more. I hunt humans on my eye. But the hunting is quite real in this case. It almost has an additional layer that's really terrifying and really seems to kind of feed part of this sadism. But we were always wondering uh, whether or not, and maybe this is about the narcissism, was he placing body parts, especially torsos, in places that hunters would find these body parts? Whether we're talking specifically, and I apologize for being kind of graphic about it, but whether that's for Valerie Mack, or whether that was for Jessica Taylor, putting these body parts out in places that people were always going to stumble upon them.
My sense is that there was in Rex Heuermann's mind, for the most part, in terms of whether it was dismemberment, whether it was body placement or wrapping, that in his, my perspective, may be separate from the belt, which I said I do think has some symbolic meaning for him. I
Yeah.
think a lot of those decisions were based on his belief in his forensic awareness and his much more than I think it became. I'm going to do this to cause this reaction, because if he can't see it, right, if he can't experience it, I mean, you can call up, a victim, Melissa's sister, and you can hear her just be traumatized by the horrible things that you're saying. If he can't see somebody stumble upon this horrific sight and be disgusted or whatever, which he's not going to, I think it really became for him all about the game of, the game of eluding capture.
Yeah.
And I think,
Forensic countermeasures, we were
yeah,
always saying, playing that game, right?
yeah.
And then how does your mind as a psychologist deal with the Mindhunter at all? Like, that must have been like, oh, geez.
What do you mean specifically, Josh? Like,
Well, not only is he playing not only is he trying to elude police, but you're talking about a planner. He's an architect. He's not stupid. He's a planner. And when you see that he's got this book, Mindhunter, like, oh my gosh, it's almost like the keys to the castle in some respects.
Yeah, it's interesting because this whole issue of, killers or murderers or, criminals reading all these books, whether they're psychological books or whether they're forensic awareness books or whatever, is something, or enrolling in criminal justice programs, which you've seen, right? I mean, I think we've long known that there's going to be a very, very small percentage of people who watch true crime who are interested in it for the wrong reasons. Like, they're interested in it to learn. They're interested in it to identify with the perpetrator, not the victim. I mean, so that's, I think, something that we as professionals have to figure out, and just to recognize. I think there's I say figure out, we can't figure that out. I mean, we can't not publish books because we're concerned that that somebody's going to pick it up and try to use it. But I do think that it's something that is unfortunate and something that we've seen before. I mean, people who, like I said, people who've gotten degrees in criminal justice, or read every serial killer book on the market and used that to kind of plan and plot and find mentors and all those kinds of things.
Yeah. What's the role that we have in all this is my question. Are we helping or hurting? What are we doing?
I think it's how it's done. I would like to think, so it kind of gets back to your question earlier, Josh, about, why should we talk about these things? I mean, are we talking about it like, I think there are ways to glorify some of these things or make them so sensational that they become appealing to a certain number of people. And then I think there are ways to talk about the fact that, when you step back, we kind of go, I've never met a serial killer or somebody who's not a coward at heart, right? Because they stack the deck so much in their favor. It's like, really, you're a hunter, and this is who you're hunting. You're literally, it's like going to the zoo. I mean, because you're setting up individuals, and you're taking advantage. You're just setting it up. They don't have a chance, and then you feel good about that. Like, that's somehow a conquest that you're. So I think it's all how we do it. And that really, I would like to think at the end of the day, if we can learn from it, if we can apply it to prevent or detect, if we can make sure that we are keeping victims front and center, and that we really are portraying, if people who do horrible things, there's nothing sexier about them. There's nothing inherently interesting in that unless we can prevent them from doing it again.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the net. One of the interesting kind of paradoxes of this, which is, at the end of the day, Rex is unbelievably weak.
Oh,
He's
yes.
Um,
Absolutely.
and the question is really how weak.
I mean, yeah. I mean, and I
Uh,
think there's so many, there's so many ways to define that. And I think he would line up, at the high end on many, just about everything I can think of in terms
mhm.
of courage, right? In terms of ability to deal with his own problems, in terms of, there's honesty. I mean, all kinds of things that we can say, no, this is somebody who absolutely refused to deal with his any trauma he experienced in life in any kind of constructive way, who chose the most maladaptive coping mechanisms. That there are plenty of people who've had the exact experiences he's had, who've chosen different paths. There's spent his time fantasizing about hurting people. I mean, just there's all different ways
Mhm.
we can talk about the fact that, if these things are true, that he is weak in so many respects.
Which is ironic because we have this idea of
Mm.
super smart serial killers,
Mhm.
but in fact, the truth is how weak they truly are.
Absolutely.
Wow, it's kind of fascinating because we don't really, as a society, look at it like that. They all get the Hannibal Lecter treatment rather than the wow, you think you're so great, but you're just unbelievably weak.
Yeah, I think that I know. I think that's true, and I hope we can shift that narrative to some extent. I do. I mean, I think I understand it. I mean, we were talking about Helter Skelter earlier, and how I could put
Hmm.
that book down and read it cover to cover, and um, I think part of it is it's scary for all of us to think there are people who would do those things. It's terrifying, and so I think there's a sense to understand that from that perspective alone. Um,
Well, you said something interesting, which is what's truly scary is that people who are just as weak as us, normal people,
uh
can do this.
Yes.
That's what's truly scary because the ultimate question always is, could I be that person? You know, we've talked to people about urban legends and things like that, and that's why we fear the mentally ill, because we fear that we may one day may wake up and be mentally ill or in out of control of our own um, impulses. And so what you're saying to me and what I'm extrapolating is that we like to make these serial killers super humans because it almost makes us feel better about ourselves.
Mm. I think there's some truth to that. But I also think there is a rejection of that, right? That makes us do that. It's like if we called if he called Rex Heuermann a monster, then he's not like us. We can never be like Rex Heuermann because we're normal people. We're human beings. He is a monster, meaning he's otherworldly. And the opposite of that is true, as you just said. Um,
Mm-hmm.
he's somebody who's a weak person, but definitely a person.
You just hit on something which is almost like the main theme of our podcast in some respects, which is like I remember when I was sitting in my a gym and the picture of Rex came up and it was him taking the selfie, and I was like, this is the guy. Now, different from the Son of Sam reaction, which was one of the other reactions that everybody gave. Like, this schlub is the guy, but it was a slightly different one, which is this is the guy. This kind of oafish, kind of older, oafish, overweight dude. This was the guy who eluded Suffolk County for so many years. This was the super duper serial killer that we had chased for so
Yeah.
long. And it was it was almost like melancholy suburban. Ugh.
Yeah. I mean, and so many people I know when John Douglas, interviewed 36 serial killers years ago. I mean, I know he had the same reaction whenever he interviewed somebody. I mean, I used to work in a maximum security prison, and I've certainly interviewed many people who were premeditated murderers, and and you meet with them, and you're just like, I mean, I've never gone away being like, wow, this guy seems so powerful. It just, it's no, it's not like that. I mean, but I do think again, and that's why for me, I have such a reaction when somebody says, I mean, separate from victim family member. They can call who that. I mean, they can call that person whoever they want.
Yeah,
But
yeah, they
when
have allowance to do that. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. But professionals especially, when we talk about, this person's a monster, it's like, no, this person is not a monster. Don't You're giving this person unnatural power, even if it's evil power. You're elevating this person in a bizarre kind of way. And you're saying that this person is so different and unique that we could never understand this person. It's like, yeah, we can understand this person. This person is somebody who, was unable to do in life what most of us can do, which is learn to cope effectively without hurting other people. I mean, this is not a hard person to understand. Now,
Hmm.
we need to understand how this person evaded the law and how this person, the ruse that they used and how they hit all those kind of things. Yes, we need to figure that stuff out. But to think this person is so psychologically complicated, no.
By the way, we have this notion of the super serial killer is what got us in trouble with Dave Schaller. When Dave told us that this ogre of a man had been to Amber's house and a week before or a day before, we don't quite know, but had been to the house a week before and had gotten burned in this ruse, we're like, oh, there's no way that this guy who has taken all these precautions is going to go back again. But he did. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting because I can completely understand how anybody would think the same thing. Because again, you have all this guy who's got, he's like 007 with the burner phones, right? He's doing all these countermeasures and making all these kind of plans and that kind of thing. But when you step back and you look at his life and his pattern of behavior over time, what you see is this is somebody who he has to win, right? He has to be in control, he has to dominate. And, for him to think that anybody would be able to trick him would have been, I mean, I can't imagine the rage he would have felt. And I think if this is somebody who is going to put himself at risk of being identifiable, it's going to be from one of two things, because he can sexually get off on it or he can pay somebody. And we know that he called Melissa's sister, right, to tell her what he's done and get off on that, which makes sense, I think, psychologically. And the fact that he would go back in and risk all of that makes complete sense too, because he is not going to let that end in this way.
Right. So it's almost like the revenge fantasy of the childhood playing out.
Oh, I mean, I cannot imagine how that triggered him, right? In terms of here he is feeling powerless again, right? Here's this little girl in his mind or whatever, however, who has tricked him and she's gotten one over on him. And he would have just been absolutely enraged by that. And you see that. I mean, because this is somebody who spent, like you were saying, hours planning and all that, and yet he risked that. That shows you how angry he was, right? And how determined he was to flip the script on what had happened.
Oof. Last question. I know a lot of people have asked this question. Where, and maybe this is the one place where we also can't tell, but the family man versus the kind of serial killer allegedly, where do you think this family fits in? Is it real to him? Is this a construct? Where do you think this whole thing fits?
I have thought so much about that. I really have. And I think that, do I think he had some attachment to his family? I do think he had some attachment to his family. Do I think he had the same attachment to his family that many people do? No, I think it was convenient, I think, for him to have a family. I think that he, I'm absolutely sure, was in control of his family and called the shots in his family. I think that when he was away from them, probably didn't spend much time thinking about them. So I think that they were convenient for him. I think that he was attached to his family in some way, but on a relatively shallow level. This is just my sense of him. So, even if this person, let's just assume for just a minute, or let's pretend for a minute that we know that he's a psychopath. There's a lot of myths about, what psychopathy is. And one of them is they can't feel anything for anybody else. And that's just not true. It's just they love differently. They attach differently, right? It's that they don't have feelings. They can have a sense of ownership, for example. Um, they can have a sense of, again, of convenience, or this person is, it's more transactional, right? This person's giving me this, so I'm giving them that. So it's not, and so I wouldn't be surprised if there was a lot of that went on. How much his wife knew about how he felt or didn't feel about her, I don't know. She's the only person who can answer that. But I definitely think that it would, my sense is, it was a different kind of relationship, I think, than many of us might have.
Mhm.
I do think he was attached to his family.
Y- Yeah, it looks like there's some attachment.
Yeah.
Well, I also wonder, was there a narcissistic attachment in like, I'm the man and like I may do these horrific things, but I've got a family and I'm, pulling my end of the American dream that
Oh,
way.
well, was it a cover to some extent, or all those could be true, right?
Mhm.
Yes. So part of my living, part of my, you know, to use a kind of tried and true statement, the mask, was that part of the mask that I'm a family man? I'm a father, possibly. Yeah, it's convenient for him, and it certainly would have served him well, right? To be a family man who's been married for years, and is an architect in the community. That he's not going to be the number one suspect that police think about. Um, but I think it was more than that. But I do think it was probably much more transactional and much more like we were talking about than not.
Because I asked this question because I'm trying to see whether he might plead or not, and how much his family means to him on the pleading side. If he would plead guilty, take a plea.
Yeah, it's another question I've been asked several times. I would be, I don't know. I mean, I think he's going to want to talk about it at some point and brag about it. I do think that's true. I think you're right. The question is when, right? When. And so I don't have a sense of, would he do this and take a plea? I have a hard time thinking that.
Because
So
that's a sign of weakness.
I'm not sure he wants to really, I'm not sure he wants his daughter, for example,
Well,
yeah, I mean, I'm not sure he's ready to walk that path yet. Um, I'm looking at some of the other sexually motivated serial killers like BGK. I know that
mhm.
in talking with Carrie Rossum that, her dad just denied it at the beginning. And she defended him and then he confessed. And then, she had to kind of, was horrible, pick up the pieces and figure out what her life was like now. So
Yeah.
I would be surprised if he pleads. Um,
Okay.
for that reason alone, I don't think he wants to. I'm not sure he wants his kids to know at this point. But I would be. I mean, the fact that he's already written to at least one serial killer, and apparently when he's in prison, I mean, I can't imagine him not wanting to talk at some point.
Oh, right, right.
Yeah.
How do you reconcile the paradox of some guy who's such an unbelievable, meticulous planner, but then keeps souvenirs in his house in plain sight?
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting because my husband and I have this discussion all the time. Um, about the power of emotions, right? It's like, look, I mean, when we are attached to things, right? It's like, yes, we are all rational human beings to some extent. But really, when we're buying a car, what do? We may think we have a list. We go in there, we want to do A, B, and C. But almost all the time, there's some emotion involved. We buy is this is the car. This is the car. And then we start justifying and rationalizing and making all that work. And the logic starts working. I think it's true. It's like no matter how logical and planned and those kinds of things, our psychological needs take precedent. And and this is somebody who, of course, is going to figure out how he thinks he can hide these trophies or right. What I mean, he's going to convince himself that he can hide them. But if he has that need to keep this trophy, then he is going to do it. Right? He
Mhm.
is going because it meets that psychological need for him, which in that moment is more important than
Yeah.
safety, right? Than the risk. And so
Yeah.
he tries to meet both of those needs, but he's not going to do it by letting go of one. Right? He's going to find a
Right.
way to keep that's my sense of it.
I'm sorry. One more question. Um, can you tell me about and I have a very specific, the reason I'm asking this is actually related to a clue or a crime.
Okay.
The need to revisit the gravesite, the need to revisit the grave sites. Is that something that you see a lot, or I know we talk about it in this case?
I mean, do I see it? Oh, I know, right? Because most people don't. First of all, most murderers are impulsive and the 5 minutes of madness, right? And then somebody would never do it again. So now we're talking about this very small number that are premeditated, and then, so we're just narrowing it down. So let's talk about, do we see it often in sexually motivated,
Yeah.
serial killers? It's not uncommon. I don't have statistics for you, but it certainly isn't uncommon. We know that Ted Bundy did that. We know that there have been other serial killers who went back to scene the crime. And I think what that is a lot of times, I think, and this has come from people who've done it, right? This is not some great insight on my part, although I think it fits with their psychology. Is it's a couple of things, I think, for that person. It's a way to relive it and be close to this person. They have ownership still, right? I'm
Mm.
putting in quotation marks. This is another ownership, and go back and visit this person. There's a sexual component. I mean, I don't want to go down that path, but
Sure.
you know where I'm headed with that. And that's
Hmm.
another motive. But I think oftentimes I heard one person in an interview with a serial killer who called it sacred ground. That was kind of what he called it. It was like going back was like, yeah, it was like, because he could really, of course, it wasn't about that person, right? It was all about him. It was about, he could relive all the things he had done, right? This was another, it was an opportunity to be close to a memory for him of,
Hmm.
of what he did, and that excitement and that thrill and all that it meant for him. And I think that's most often what it is for people who feel the need to go back and revisit. It's that, way to, it's like looking through a scrapbook in a weird kind of way.
Mm.
Um,
Do you, from sexual sadist killers, do you see that behavior specifically a lot in that 1% of sexual sadists?
yeah, I keep saying it's not uncommon just because I don't know that I can say of all the sexual sadists, 50% go back to the grave. I don't know a
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
percentage. So
yeah.
I would say I don't think it's a majority, because I think
Hmm.
there's a self-preservation part of it that would keep many people from going back even if they wanted to, which maybe why they take trophies instead, so they can just do it at
Yeah.
home and not have any risk. But I do think it's not uncommon. I mean, it's going to be over 20%, I would imagine. Which is a lot, right? When you think about doing that, because it's risky to go back and do that.
Unless, well, we were always, because one of our biggest questions, and the thing is, okay, why Ocean Parkway, right? And of course, we now know that there's a long history of him hunting in Ocean
Yeah,
Parkway, so it's
yeah,
not just his hunting grounds. It's not just, quote unquote, and I say this and I apologize, dumping grounds, but it's also his hunting grounds.
yeah.
There's a lot of combined behaviors
Mhm.
there,
And I
right?
think, absolutely. And I think, okay, I tend to be a pragmatist about some of this stuff, where it's like, okay, why did he do that? Probably because he knows it, right?
Yeah,
He knows it.
right,
I mean,
right.
is there some psychological? Maybe there is, but I think, like in medicine, they say, when you hear hoofbeats, look for horses, not zebras. I mean, um, I think there's a practical part of that here, right? That most most murderers, when they're trying to get rid of a body, are going to pick a place they've gone. It often does not have
Yeah.
any psychological significance to them. They just know where it is. They know where to hide the body. They know, they're familiar with the land and the soil and all kinds of stuff.
Right. Well, we were trying to think of whether, again, we've seen too many movies, but that sort of thing. But then, the other question is for us, Manorville, which is a slightly different thing. 50 miles away, why Manorville? And we had all these ideas. Well, it's a hunter. It's more of this hunting thing that was so big for him. But then we found out that he belonged to a hunting shooting range that was literally 2.5 miles from where he discarded Jessica Taylor's remains, where he could literally, this is the creepy part, drive by on any given Sunday and see the exact spot where he deposited those remains on his way to the shooting range.
I mean, I think that I can't discount that. I mean, again, could it be both? This is
Yeah.
somebody who's driven by there. He knows the land. I mean, it does say something though, Josh, that he would be able to drive by and see and
Yeah.
relive that himself. So I cannot certainly eliminate that as partially the reason he chose that spot.
Well, also too, when you're older, because like as I've heard you talk about, do you believe that he's killed again after Amberlynn Costello?
It's hard for me to imagine that he is not. I mean,
Oh, that he has not. That he has not.
so you're talking about, I'm sorry, which period of time? So,
We're talking about his last victim that we know of is Amberlynn Costello.
okay.
Whether or not he's killed after Amberlynn Costello.
Uh, I will say this. The fact that law enforcement acted when they did, because he was actively soliciting and starting to go that path again, is very concerning to me. So it could be that he stopped because he was,
Mhm.
worried, or he was starting to age out. And I mean, some people don't age out. They don't, right? I mean, the odds are that they do, but they don't always. And so I'll say this: whether he actually killed again, I think he was very active, certainly internally, right?
Mhm.
Um, and I would imagine they found a lot of pornography on his computer that was after Amber Costello. So his desires would not have gone away. And so whether he was starting to get ramped up again and was starting to go that path, that is really concerning to me. It's one thing to find Joseph D'Angelo, years later, and
Yeah.
there's been no indication whatsoever that he's murdered anybody for 20 or 30 years, right? I mean, there was just no indication of that. The guy was a grandfather, did just living kind of a normal life in spite of the horrible things he did. And then somebody who seems to be engaging in some of the behaviors that we know he did when he murdered these young women.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, is there anything last question, is there anything that you want to know that that still kind of concerns you, or it's like, oh, I have one question that I want to know. Anything on your end?
Wow. Though I would like to know. I mean, obviously, I would love to know if there are other victims out there and where they are and who they are, and it's the families that have been waiting for so long. And I guess the other thing that we all want to know is, why it took so long for these cases to get solved. I mean, that's a series in of itself, I guess, but it's 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 hard to think about some of the stumblings that went on, to use a nice word, in this case. And
We
I
we could.
guess the other thing I would just mention is, you know, I guess it isn't really a question as much as it just is a comment, and that is, the fact that we've seen this increase in serial killers targeting sex workers over the past 30 years. And I really hope that we get to the point that that's a non-issue in terms of a victim, because somebody may engage in behavior that isn't who they are. And, I think that we have a long way to go as a society in starting to, you know, let go of some of the ideas we have about who the perfect victim is, in quotation marks.
So, big thank you to Dr. Joni Johnston for giving us this clear picture of how this darkness develops. Now, the point of all this is that we can stop these tragedies from starting rather than continue to keep talking about them afterwards. And who knows, maybe you know a teacher or a coach or have a kid in high school who can reach out and make the difference. Now, if you want deeper dives or go behind the scenes or bonus episodes that you can't get anywhere else, then join our Patreon or become a YouTube member, because your support helps keep these investigations going. I'm Josh Zeman, and thanks for watching.